Hey, Professor, we got a question today about subagency. What can you tell me?
Okay, here's what you need to know for subagency on the exam. First of all, think about this. Actually, all agents are subagents. If you think about it, when the seller lists with a firm, the firm is the agent. And so the listing agent would actually be the sub-agent of the firm. So the sub-agent of the seller. So the only thing that's trickier about the question that you asked had to do with it was a cooperating seller sub-agent, which means that it's an agent with another firm who actually has a buyer in the car, but is working for the seller. Now here's the trick on this one. First of all, don't fight the test. And here's what I mean by that. This will not come up likely in North Carolina. The fact of the matter is 99% of the buyers that have an option are going to choose to be represented by buyer's agents. So seller sub-agency is rare. Let's walk through how you get there. You have an agent and you have a buyer. Now, as you've learned in your studies, when the agent and the buyer reach a substantial contact, first substantial contact, they go over the Working with Real Estate Agents brochure. Actually, disclosure now, it's no longer a brochure. They go over the Working with Real Estate Agents disclosure. The agent explains the agency options that are available, and the buyer says, you know what, I've bought houses before, I really don't need to be represented. Again, let me remind you, don't fight the test. If the test tells you that the buyer chooses not to be represented, then that's the case. So you have these doors of decision. The buyer could have chose you as a buyer agent, but instead, they chose you as what is known as a seller sub-agent. Seller sub-agent. What does that mean? This agent right here doesn't work for that buyer. Why? Because the buyer chose to be unrepresented. The agent works through the listing firm, not with the listing firm. Remember, it's with a different company. They work through the listing firm as an agent of the seller. Now, I can imagine that this would come up on somewhere between 0 to 3 places on the exam. One place that it could come up on the exam is if the agent is a seller sub-agent, who does he owe all loyalty to? And the answer is he owes all loyalty to the seller. So if the buyer says, hey, look, I'm going to offer $350, but I'd go to $360, the agent has to go back and tell the seller that he would go to $360. The other place this comes up has to do with when offers become contracts. Now, that's not part of this lesson. If you'd like that, I'll go into detail on it later. But for right now, that buyer is unrepresented. This guy works for the seller. Why? Because the seller chose to be unrepresented. The buyer chose to be unrepresented. Here's the third point that I wanted to make. Listen, normally a buyer would sign a buyer agency agreement, and so you would have it documented on why the buyer selected or how the buyer selected to be represented. But in this case, he's not in buyer agency, so he wouldn't have signed a buyer agency agreement. So here's the important point. Where is the only place that this is going to be documented that the buyer is unrepresented? And the answer is, it's in the Working with Real Estate Agents disclosure, where the box was initialed, that the box was checked, that the buyer understands that they are not represented. Seller sub-agency, not a huge part of the exam, not going to happen a lot, but it doesn't mean it's impossible in North Carolina.